There we go. Top of the afternoon, bystanders and spectators and people who've just swung by to check out what's going on. Anyway, today we are going to shade this image all the way through. So we've already got it flatted, and I've already shown you guys how to create your own actions for it. And now what I'm going to do is I am going to give it all the necessary elements to give it depth, to convey lighting in the scene, and to show you how to make certain things like texture and anatomical details. And speaking of anatomical details, we are going to get started first here with the skin tones. The first thing that we do with the skin tones is let me move my windows around here so we can see what's going on. I'm going to move my navigator, move the navigator over there. My layers there, and I'm going to go for my swatches right here. I know that most people, when they work, they usually have the layers window over on the right side of the screen while everything else is on the left. And one of the reasons why I move the layers over to the left side of the screen is simply to make it more accessible, so that all my stuff is clumped together, so when I start adjusting things, all I have to do is move everything to the left. Since I also work on a drawing tablet, the left side is closer to me because the drawing tablet is physically sitting to the right of the PC that I'm working on. So when I move everything to the left, I don't have to reach as far to access anything in the layers menu. So anyway, I start out by selecting the color wand, and what I'm going to do is when I have flats set like this where everything is just a simple single color with no anti-aliasing in between the pixels, so no blending between the pixels, when I have a set of flats like this, the first thing I do to set them apart from their flats layers is I select the color wand tool, and then for the settings of the color wand I have it set so the tolerance is at 0, so that means that it will only select what is exactly the color that I click on. If I have the tolerance turned up, it'll, select colors that are closer to it, and the more leeway it has towards other colors it selects, the higher the tolerance needs to be. But if the tolerance is at 0, that means that it will only select exactly that color, and that's what I want. So tolerance at 0, anti-alias checked off, contiguous checked off, and sample all layers checked off. So I am working within the same layer. It selects everything that's on the layer that I'm working on, not just what's adjacent to the selection, but all of the same color. And anti-alias is off so I don't get halos or any sort of smudging or blending effects that I don't want. And all I do is with the color wand selected, I just click, while holding down shift, click, and then hold down shift again, click. So now I have her face, her lips, neck, and chest selected, and since there are no other skin tones in here, I am done with this selection. And to separate it from the flats layer, so that, if I mess up I can always go back to it, or create a new layer. To separate it, I hold down Control, and I press J, and you'll see what it did was it created a whole new layer right there called Layer 1. And Layer 1, if I hold down Alt and click on the visibility icon, so it just shows that, Layer 1 is just the skin tones. So now I can work strictly off of that. And now you'll notice that a lot of things are different colors. There are very subtle differences in color in between parts, like where the mandible overlaps, where the nose overlaps the cheek behind it. And I did that for the purpose of getting better, more accurate rim lighting and being able to put it in a lot faster. But since I don't want those differences to be as visible, what I do is I'm going to create a layer on top of it, and I am going to link it to the layer underneath it so that the layer underneath it, Layer 1, acts as kind of the borders of it. So here's what we do. Create a new layer, and then hold down Alt to bring up the eyedropper tool, or select the paintbrush tool, hold down Alt to bring up the eyedropper tool, and just click on any of the skin tones that you have there. So I'm going to select that one right there. And then, with that new layer still selected, hold down Alt and press Delete. So now we get everything in the image is this skin tone color. And if I want to confine it to just the borders of these skin tones that I have right here in layer 1, I just hold down Alt and I click between the two layers, and they are linked like that. So now you'll see that when I toggle the visibility of this new layer, everything underneath it appears, but when I toggle it visible, it's now all just one color. And that's what I want to happen, because I'll still be able to select these flats even though I'm working in a single color, and you'll see that having the different colored flats allows me to get some better effects in. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a quick evaluation of this color itself, and I'm thinking to myself that it's not dark enough, it's not saturated enough, so we're not going to get too good a skin tone out of it. So before I get into it, I'm just going to go into the Hue Saturation menu, and I'm going to reduce its lightness, increase its saturation, and make it a little bit more on the red side than on the yellow side. And I can always fix this later on. But now that I got this color down and it's kind of what I want it to be, then I just hold down Alt to bring up the eyedropper tool, click on that new skin tone color, and then, here's the important part, under Mode, it's currently set to Linear Dodge. I don't want that. What I want is I want to set it to Screen. And note that I am not going to be painting the light in just yet. Before I paint in the light, I'm going to start painting in the anatomical details. So I'm going to set my brush's opacity down to about 30. I'm going to set its flow down to 30, so that means that if I overlap the brush strokes with the flow at 30, it'll become a little bit brighter, and then every time I press it, it becomes just a little bit lighter like that. Now since this new layer that I made here is separate, I can just delete everything in it. So I'm just going to press Alt Delete just to undo all that I just did right there. And since it's all separated out, I don't have to worry about ruining the image with any bad brush strokes that I make. So let's just get in here and let's just start painting in the anatomical details. Now when it comes to anatomical details, you can't really have a tutorial on this. You have to just practice a lot. So I recommend that you find a community college that has a life drawing course in it, spend $50 and just gain some familiarity on how to draw the human figure and all the muscular and skeletal forms within. Another resource that's available is a book called Atlas of the Human Anatomy for the Artist by Stephen Rogers Peck, which is a highly recommended read for those of you who want to get into some really serious anatomical drawing. Not only is it very insightful and helpful and contains all the references that you're going to need, but it also acts as a good starting point. You don't have to be an experienced artist to truly appreciate that book. So it's called Atlas of the Human Anatomy for the Artist by Stephen Rogers Peck, highly recommended. Anyway, so I'm just going to go in here and I'm just going to start painting in the anatomical details like her cheek. So I have the brush mode set to Screen, opacity at 30%, flow at 30%, and that's just my own preference. I'm going to be adjusting those the opacity and flow as I go along here. But you'll see just as I make single strokes, I'm defining the brow, the cheek, the jaw, where the jaw comes into the chin, and then upper lip, like that. And I'm also keeping it fairly loose because since it's all in its own separate layer, I can do some smudge effects on it as well. So I can use the smudge tool to really pull everything together and really define those strokes. So let's just get the inside of the ear, the eyelid like that, kind of underneath the eye. And one thing to note is that with female characters, they're supposed to look very streamlined. That's most of the appeal of the female form, is just how streamlined it is. With male characters, you can go with really hard corners and really rigid edges on them. With females, it's more about the gestural flow of the anatomy, not so much the actual construct of it, if that makes any sense. And I just keep going over spots I've already hit. And now if I want to smooth out some parts, like let's say that it looks a little bit funky right here and I want to smooth it out between the cheek and the jawline, it's really simple. So I'm just going to switch these colors so that the color I was using is still stored there, so I can always refer to it. And for this color, I'm just going to select on it there, and instead of picking a color right here, let's just move that aside. And let's pick one of the brighter colors right here, and you'll see that I can select colors straight off of the canvas that I'm working on. So let's go with that, and instead of the mode at screen for my brush, I'm going to set my brush mode to normal, keep all the other opacity and flow settings the same, and I'm just going to make downward strokes like that just to pull the cheek into the jawline to kind of blend them together. And then I can do the same thing, so like where the mandible hits the cheek. And I can just do some impromptu shading like this, just to kind of pull it all together. And just a little bit here, a little bit there. And then blending in the jaw to the ear, getting that earlobe in. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select my smudge tool, strength at 50%, let's make it 70% so it really makes it. Sample all layers is off, finger painting is off. And what I can do is, let me just illustrate here by unlinking this. Since this is what I have made so far, I'm not going to have to worry about smudges creating any sort of issues around the line art or the other fills, because all the shading that I just did for the anatomy is on its own separate layer, and it has what I call this leeway around the edges, this kind of a blend around the edges, so that if I were to smudge, I'm not going to get any hard edges when I smudge around the other fills. So for those of you who have tried smudging with your shading and you get these issues where, you know, it feels like it's pulling part of the flats underneath it into the image and you don't want it to do that, having it in its own separate layer overcomes that obstacle. So let's pull this in so the mandible comes all the way up towards the nostril. And with the smudge tool, I'm still painting, per se. I'm still defining edges and shape and form. What you can do is, while you work, I mean, you can just adjust the slider like this to set the strength of it. Another thing you can do is you can just press the numbers on your keyboard. So if I press 2, let me zoom in on this. If you press the number 2, you'll see that the strength changes to 20%. If I press 5, it goes to 50%, and if I press 0, it goes to 100%. And then if I want something in between, if I were to want 25%, I just push 2 and 5 really fast, and there we go. That same shortcut applies to the brush tool as well, with the opacity. So on the brush tool, if the opacity is at 30%, I can press 5 and I can set it to 50%. I can press 8, set it to 80%, and then for the flow, similarly, I can press the numbers on the top of the keyboard, but if I hold down Shift and then press the numbers, then it starts affecting the flow. So if I were to press Shift and then 8, makes it 80%, Shift and 0 makes the flow 100%. but I still want it to be at 30%. So Shift and 3, and opacity I want it to be at 30% instead of 80%. So I just press 3. So yeah, just a nifty little shortcut for you guys to use something that I use quite a lot. But right now, I'm still going to be smudging the shading on the face here. So it's at 25% right now. I want to set it to, let's go with 60%. So I'm going to press 6 on the keyboard. So now it's at 60%. And let's just continue on painting. I'm going to select the brush tool, set to normal, and again I'm just going to blend it in a little bit like this. Do some more blending with the brush tool. Going to switch the colors around. Now I can press this button right here to switch the colors. Also, you can use X to switch between them. So with the shortcut of X, you can switch between these colors just to get between them much quicker. So I'm going to go with the darker color to define the eyelid a bit more. And then press X to switch to the lighter color that I have. Getting some more definition. Press X, get the underside of the nose. Press X. Top side of the nose, kind of pull it in like that. And then if I want further details, I can always change the brush mode from normal to screen. So if I really want to pull that cheek out a little bit more, make it a bit lighter, there we go, just like that. Get some more details in around the ear. Doesn't need to be too detailed. And then I'm going to do just a massive blend with the darker brush like that. Just kind of pull it all together. And note that this isn't really shading. This is just defining the placement and the form of the character's anatomical structure. The shading comes in the next step. So let's finish up shading this character, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this layer that I have right here, which is, let me make this invisible, which is the original flat that I had separated out in the very beginning. I'm going to select the color wand, tolerance at 0, anti-alias, contiguous, and sample all layers unchecked. And I'm just going to click on her neck, like that, and I'm going to click on her chest right there. So there we go. Oh, but I don't want that part of her face highlighted either, so let's undo that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to check contiguous. So with contiguous checked, it's not going to select this color and this color, it's just going to select all the adjacent pixels to the selection right there. So now with the neck and her chest highlighted, I can make anatomical details without painting over the other anatomical details along her jaw and her chin and her cheek. So let's make the new layer visible. Let's select that new layer, and let's just do it again. Set the brush mode from normal to screen. Let's change it to the base skin color that we have. And let's just give her some more details. The structure of the neck is kind of like a tube and a V that goes down towards the collar. So we're going to do it the throat, which is just kind of a straight shot going straight down, connecting the mouth to the chest. And then this musculature right here follows along the throat like that. Now let's just figure out what other anatomical details need to be added. We got collarbone we can do. The sternum, the rib cage, ribs like that, a little bit thicker. And I do them really lightly, just so I know that they're there. And then what other musculature comes on it, you know, so just the natural fat and muscle that you would see on there. And then I'm going to change my mode from screen to normal, and where the breast would start coming out, there would be a little bit of a shelf right there. So we push it back a little like that. And then we just define the brush or the breast like so. And so I'm making motions and painting that go with the whole curvature of the body. And there we go. Let's switch our colors, set it to normal, and let's just start ironing out all that we did right here. So let's put in some extra details, really define the collarbone coming down, sternum, blend, and then just going to select the other breast, which I had separated out in the flats, so that way when I set it to screen and the normal color, one second. When I select it and then go back to that layer and then start painting on it, I get a good edge right there. So it still looks nice and separated, and while it's nice to have for the anatomy, it'll also work really well for the shading as well. So let's just get in some last minute details here to kind of define certain parts a little bit better. A little better definition around the nostril and the bridge for nose right there. Just a little more detailing on the brow, our forehead. And lastly, just some detailing to give a little bit of volume to those lips. Like so. You can use the smudge tool to kind of just pinch it in a little bit right there. And there we go. This should look somewhat good by the time it all comes around. But remember, this is still flat. This isn't shaded at all. So what I'm going to do for the shading is I'm going to go to my color swatches, and let me just show you what I have here for the color swatches. So I have a bunch of skin tones right here for various different characters, and then I have different lighting schemes. So I have, you know, dusk and fluorescent and sunsets. And for this one, let's go with a I'm up for a dusk. So we're going to go with kind of a dusk lighting scheme. So it's going to have kind of a desaturated greenish yellow for a highlight. It's going to have a nice yellow for one of the rims, and then another rim light is going to be pink. So first thing I'm going to do is going to select the shadow color, which is a mid-saturated purple, like so. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to hold down Alt to link the layer to the skin tones that I already made. So now they're all together. I'm going to hold down Alt, press Delete. So now everything looks purple. And I'm going to set the layer mode from normal to multiply. Now for those of you who have seen my actions tutorial, you'll remember that I already have an action for creating exactly just that, which is this right here, the create shadow layer action. And since this is the same way I create all my shadows, it's good just to have an action there in place so that I can very quickly create that layer. So let's just delete this layer and show you that with the action in place, which I assigned to the F3 key, when I press F3, it creates my shadow layer for me really quickly. So I'm going to be working with the eraser instead of the brush tool, and I'm going to be painting in this alpha channel right here that is attached to the shadow layer. So instead of erasing the purple right here, I'm going to be erasing the alpha channel instead, because it saves memory, and also because if I were to erase like this, I don't have to switch tools to paint it back in or make sure that my coloring is just right. I just have to switch the colors right here so I can erase it back in. So you'll see that when it's black, it'll paint it in, and then when it's white, it will erase the purple shadow. So we're not really painting in light as much as we are erasing away shadow. So let's get that restarted there. Okay. Gonna set my flow from 100% to 30%, or I can just press Shift 3 to do that. And for the shading, I like to start out, just nice and big, just get the general feel of it, capturing the whole curvature of the head. In this one, I'm going to have the lighting scheme coming from the upper right, being cast in a downward motion towards her, probably at about a 30 or a 45 degree angle. It doesn't have to be exact or mathematically accurate, just enough so that when the eye looks at it, it doesn't see anything wrong with it, that it still conveys the intended light direction. So yeah, there we go. You'll see that the this is the shading that I have so far, and when it's mixed with the anatomy underneath it, you get a nice blend between the anatomical structure and the lighting structure. And since they're separated, if I want to downplay the intensity of the shadows, I can do it really easily without having to redo all the anatomical details I already did. And vice versa, I can reduce the anatomical details without having to redo the shadows that I did. So by keeping them separate, I'm able to work with both of them and adjust both of them without having to readjust the other aspect as well. So let's continue on this. Select the alpha channel of the shadow. Paint that in. Just a little bit lighter there at the top. This method of doing shadows is also a really good way to create drop shadows, so that drop shadows will not only appear with the same uniform coloring of the other shadows you have in place, but it'll also blend into the existing shadows as well, so that you don't have overlapping drop shadows creating something that's twice as intense. If you have overlapping shadows, they're going to be the same intensity no matter what. Now remember how in the flats, if I select this layer right here and select my color wand, how the flats are separated like this. Let's turn off contiguous really quickly. And I'm going to take advantage of this for the first time in this whole image by selecting this part of the face right here, which is the back cheek behind her nose, so her right cheek. And then I'm going to select this layer right here. Select my eraser. I'm going to set my opacity to 100%, set my flow to 100%, and I'm going to create just a really strong drop shadow back here. So let me just zoom in on that to really show that I'm creating this drop shadow, but it's not affecting her nose. It's just affecting where the drop shadow should be, which is on her cheek behind the nose. So I get a really good separation between the two. I can do the same, put a little drop shadow under her lips like that. A little bit under her mask. Deselect it. Just going to define the eye sockets a little bit more. Undo that, that's too intense. Set my flow to 30%. A little bit more blending. And it's going to really quickly get the ear done as well. So let's do the top of the earlobes like that. So like that. Get the interior of the ear like that. Kind of the shadow dropping in there. And then I'm also going to do the hair, so I'm going to reduce my brush size so I can get a harder edge. I'm going to set my opacity to 100%, so I press 0. Set my flow to 100%, so shift 0. Just using those shortcut keys. And I am just going to pull down a line like that. And then fill in everything above it. So now you get a drop shadow being cast by the hair, so it looks like the hair is overlapping. Just like that. Now let's use the smudge tool here, because you can also smudge on the alpha layer as well. So I'm just going to use the smudge tool to fix that error that I just put in right there. And to kind of just smooth out these edges like this. So I'm just going to smudge along the edges to smooth them out like so. I need to pinch it in a little bit more like that. And select the eraser, get that back in there. Alright, so that's looking better. So the face has shadow applied to it now. I'm still going to apply highlighting to it, but we'll do that later. So similarly how we did the anatomical details on the neck, I'm going to select the layer that has the flats on it, select the color wand, and just select accordingly. I'm going to have to turn on contiguous again because her left cheek and her chest are the same color. So I just want the chest. Just like that. I'm going to select my eraser, select the shadow layer, make sure I have the alpha channel selected, and let's just go with a bigger brush, like that. Set my opacity to 30%, set my flow to 30%, switch this around so I'm going to be erasing the shadow. Just like that. And you'll see that since I already did the anatomical details before, I don't really have to do a lot when I paint away the shadows, because the anatomical details will convey a lot of the volumetric and structural information about the construct of her neck as well. So by doing the anatomy before doing the lighting, it allows me to do the lighting and the shadow a lot faster. So let's just keep on poking around at that. And then since I have the selection in place so that it's only on her neck and not her jaw, so that, you know, I can't draw up here and affect it at all, what this allows me to do is I'm going to switch this to black. I'm going to set the opacity to 100%, set the flow to 100%. Let's reduce my brush size so it's fairly small so I get a good hard edge. And kind of like how I did the drop shadow up here, I'm going to do the same exact thing, and I'm going to create a drop shadow under her jaw, like this. To, again, just give a little bit more detail like that. And I want to pull it down just a little bit underneath that so that it has some more definition. Now remember what I said about how working in an alpha channel like this has the shadows blending into each other, and you'll see what I mean right here. When I pull this towards the edge, you'll see that the amount it gets darker, it doesn't get as dark as it does over here. So the difference over here is much more intense, whereas on this side, the difference between the shadows, in particular right here, aren't as noticeable. And that is actually proper light logic. That is what should be happening. So here I'm going to do another drop shadow under her collar like that. And then I can just do some more drop shadows for these fuzzy parts that would be overlapping it. So this one little tendril sticking up right there, I can define it like that. This one right here, I can define it right here. And then this one I can just go like that. And then this one right here, go like that. Right there, I can go like that. Let's deselect it by pressing Ctrl D. I'm going to set my eraser opacity to 30%, set the flow to 30%, and go back up to something bigger. And again, I'm just going to just shade accordingly. And fortunately, the anatomical details already put in should be doing most of the work for me. So there we go. So I'm going to set it to 100% opacity, press Shift 0 for 100% flow, and again, just going to get the drop shadows in place for where that fuzzy part would be overlapping, just kind of like that. I'm going to use my smudge tool to bring it to a better point, like that. And getting those details, that detail, pull this out like that. Details. I'm going to go to the flats layer that I had, access the color wand, click right there, and then what I can do is going to go into the shadow layer right here, select my eraser, and I can create a drop shadow for where her left breast would be casting a shadow on the right breast, just like that. So something kind of simple, subtle, like that. Just kind of separate them apart like that. And I'm going to just blend in a little bit more shadow right here, because that is what my gut is telling me to do. As I said earlier on the flatting tutorial, a lot of what's going on here is just based upon gut instinct. So if my gut's telling me to do it, I do it. So just a little bit of refining right here, a little bit more right there, a little bit more right there. Need a much better drop shadow right there. Pro tip, mumble to yourself when you work. I know that you're going to sound a little bit crazy to people around you, but for a lot of people, it will really help you concentrate and see what you're doing if you're just mumbling what you're doing. I know it sounds crazy, I do it all the time. In fact, the fact I do it probably legitimizes the fact that it's crazy. Anyway. Let's see here, opacity 20%, flow 20%, so I'm going to go just a little bit lower just so I can, you know, get some definition there on the left breast as well. I'm going to select it. I'll go back into it like that. There we go. So that's 50%. Alright, excellent. It's coming together pretty well. Let's say that I look at this and I just check out the relationship between the shadow and the skin tones underneath it. And let's just say, for example, that I think the shadow looks too intense or it looks too saturated, instead of having to redo all the shading work that I did just right now, I can just go over right here, select this really bright purple that I have, and let me just save this really quickly. So instead of calling it flats, I'll just call it Black Cat Inked as is. Save it again, Black Cat Inked _B. So now I have a backup. Anyway, so if I don't like the shadow color, let's say I want it to be more blue, or I want it to be less saturated, I just select that right there, the flat purple, and just access my Hue Saturation menu, and I can adjust the shadow just like that. So now if I want it to be a simple black shadow, I can just turn out all the saturation and reduce the lightness of it. Now, I hate doing black shadows, so that ain't gonna happen. Let's turn that back up. And if I want it to be maybe a little bit more blue like that, but yeah, I just want it to be a little bit less saturated like that. So you can adjust your shadow after you have it put in. And also for my skin tones, I might think they're a little bit bright. I can do the same exact thing, just reduce them, turn up their saturation a little bit. And if I wanted to, I could even go into the color balance of it, give it a little bit more red if I wanted to, or a little bit more magenta. Even go in the highlights, so the lighter parts like around her cheek appear a little bit more yellow, so she'll kind of have this golden sheen thing going. And in the darker spots, I could even make that a little bit more cyan, just kind of desaturate it a little bit more. So you can mess with these as much as you want. Another thing I can do is I can go into the flats layer, select my color wand, and with the lips selected I can go into the anatomy layer, and I can darken it like so. So let's go to our Hue Saturation again, reduce it like that, turn up its saturation, and we're going to move its hue so it's a little bit more pinkish like that. So I'm going to reduce its lightness some more, turn up its saturation. And then I can go into the color balance as well. And there we go. So if I were to hide the shadows, you'll see that I just added that to the anatomy layer. And I can add in other details to the anatomy layer as well. For example, let me go to my brush. And I actually have a brush for freckles. So if we were to open up the brush menu right here, I'm going to turn up the spacings, because you'll see that these freckles will appear really close together initially, but if I turn up the spacing in my brush menu that I can access by pressing F5, if I turn it up like that so they're nice and far apart, reduce the size, set it to multiply, and for freckles I want them to be really dark. So let's go like that. We can even turn up the flow a little bit. We can even make this much darker. So now she looks really freckled. But since she also has a very pale skin tone, it would make sense that such would appear. With the same brush highlighted, I could also create a more realistic series of pores in her skin as well. So really simple, I can just keep it at the same color. I'm going to press F5 to access my brush. And when I turned up the spacing, I'm going to turn that back down to what it was, so about 25%, so it looks really close together. I'm just going to set it to screen. Turn down the opacity, turn down the flow, like so. And probably in the stream you're not going to be able to see the details, no matter how close I zoom in, because it's very subtle. So I'll even just turn up the opacity and the flow of it just to really drive it home. Maybe even use a brighter color. There we go. Now that's too bright, but you'll see that it's at least adding this kind of a sandpapery looking thing, and that's what I want. I just don't want it that intense. So let's go back, turn down its opacity. There we go, so we have some semi-realistic looking skin texture. And the last thing that we want to do is we want to put the light on it. And this is actually much easier than doing the shadow, and it also gives it a lot more depth. So what I'm going to do is, instead of creating a whole new layer on top of it, I actually duplicate all the layers and merge them. So check this out. I hold down Shift, select all the layers that I have for my skin tones so far, and I have to make sure that it's how I want it to be. So if the shadows look fine, good. If the anatomy looks good, then proceed onward, because I'm going to hold down Alt and I'm going to just drag all three of these layers while holding down Alt, and it is going to create a duplicate of all three layers that I just had. And while they're still selected, I'm going to press Ctrl E to merge them together. So this layer that says Shadow Copy, it is actually all three of these layers merged together. And it is also automatically linked to these layers like so. So hold down Alt to just double check to make sure. So hold down Alt and click in between. And there we go. We are set and ready to create our highlights. So I'm going to select my dusk highlight first. I'm going to select just a large feathered brush, 100 points should be fine. I'm going to set the mode from screen to color dodge. So my brush mode is now at color dodge. The reason why I use color dodge is because it retains a good amount of the contrast that's already in there, so like the freckles and the skin tone, it won't blow it out of the way. It'll still lighten it a little bit, because color dodge mostly affects the mid-tones, but it also gives it a nice saturated addition to it. And since I'm using a not very saturated color, it's mostly just going to lighten it up a little bit and just give it a little bit of yellow, not a lot. So let's see how this looks. That's kind of how I want it to be too. That looks good. In fact, that looks a little bit too good. That's way too much. Just undo that. Going to set the opacity instead to 10%, just like that. Reduce the brush size. Just getting those finer details, top of the nostril. And again, just gut feeling on this. Just knowing that the lighting is going to be coming from the upper right to a lower left. That's what I want it to do. Alright. I'm going to set it to a hard brush, like this. And I'm just going to create a couple points on here. This is something that's done very commonly. I'm going to set it from color dodge to linear dodge, because linear dodge affects everything. So it doesn't affect just the midtones, it affects everything. So anything that's like, you know, a dark freckle or something, it'll be blown out by the linear dodge effect. And I want that just because I want these highlights, which I'll put in right here, just like this. I want those to really stand out. To kind of just look like a nice shine on the skin tone. Gives a bit more of a youthful, lively look to it. It's also one of the oldest tricks in the book. You'll see that a lot of manga and anime artists use this as well. So this is definitely an Eastern influenced lighting effect. So just a little bit there on the breast, like that. And then I'm going to reduce the opacity to 10% just so I can get some subtle lighting. Kind of like just a rim light, like that. Around the chin, around the neck, and kind of around the jaw. And then lastly, going to increase the opacity, maybe not even 30%, let's go 40%. And with it still set to linear dodge brush mode, just going to create a number of just these little dots going across for the highlight on the lips, and then a couple more dots coming across like this for the rim light on the lips. And one right there, and one right there, and there we go. If I want to even pull out the highlight on the lips a little bit further, I'll set it to color dodge, even keep the hard edge brush so it gives it kind of more of a chromatic look to it if I wanted it. Just go like that to really increase the contrast of it. And then the last thing that we're going to do for the skin tones is the rim light. So I want it to be, let's have the pink rim light coming from the viewer's left side. So her right side, viewer's left. And I'm going to keep that layer there, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold down Alt, and I'm going to create a new layer and merge it like so. So I create the new layer and then hold down Alt and click in between to link it underneath. So these are the same exact layer. I'm just creating a duplicate of it just in case the next step I do really doesn't look good, so I can always just go back to it. So this is kind of a save point. So I'm going to start out with it set to color dodge, and just in the same way I did before, just going to create just a little bit of pink. And where it would be pointing in the lower left direction, I want it to be a little bit more of an intense pink, like that. There you go, just like that. We wouldn't have a rim light along here because it would be blocked by this fluffy thing. And we might have a little bit of one. Reduce the opacity, just a tad subtle bit of a one right there. And then we'll also have a rim light here on her nose, but you'll know that if I were to paint down like this, the feather brush would extend into the cheek behind it. So I go to my flats layer, select my color wand, and I just select her nose like that. So now it will only affect that part of the nose, which is what I want. So select that layer, or select the layer that I'm going to be working on, select the brush tool. Let me just press Ctrl-H to hide the selection. It's still selected, I just hidden the edges of it. There we go, just like that. So it affects the edge right there without affecting anything behind it, so I get a better rim light out of it. And then press Ctrl-H again to show it again. And then going to press Ctrl-D to deselect it, like so. And just a little bit there on her lips there. Gut feeling telling me to put a little bit more right there. And if I wanted to intensify shadows around certain parts, I go back to my dusk shadow color, select my brush, set it to multiply, and that all looks fine. So if I want like the underside of the nostril to be darker, I can just start defining areas better. So it's like a post-shadow effect. And while this isn't really following proper light logic, what it is doing is it's giving greater depth and definition to the character. And from an artistic perspective, it is always more important just to have something that reads well and has depth and definition than for it to be accurate. So let's get these last little adjustments done. I'm going to set it to color dodge, set it to the highlight right there, just so I can get a bit more intense highlight on the right breast, her chest like that. Do a little bit of a more intense highlight there along her neck. And then last thing that I want to do is, since I have a pink rim light coming from the viewer's left side from her right side, on the other side I'm going to create a very subtle mid-saturated yellow rim light. And on her skin tones, the only thing that's going to pick this up are her ears. It's going to be shown more in her hair. So with the brush set to color dodge with an opacity at 30% and flow at 50%, we're just going to get this little bit of an edge right there. And that color is going to be extended through the fuzzy parts around her neck and around her latex outfit and on her hair. But the only thing that picks it up on her skin tones is her ear. So maybe we can even emphasize it a little bit more like that. And there we go. So not a lot of skin tones in this image, but at least we got the face done, and the face is the most important part. So once you have all that done, kind of in the same way that I merge the shadow and the anatomy layer together, I can just select everything like this, hold down Alt, and drag it up like that. So now I have a copy of all those layers. I'm going to press Control E to merge them together. So again, it's kind of a save point. So far, I have my first save point right here, where it's just the basic highlights added in, and then the rim lights. And now for this, I can do a little bit of post effects on this, just kind of bring back the skin tone color, because it looks really colorful and stuff, and I don't want it to be that colorful, so I'm going to desaturate it a little bit more. I'm going to set it to be a little bit more red, a little more yellow, like that, so we get kind of a more of a peachish complexion, yellowish highlights, a bit more magenta for the shadows. So it goes from that to that. And I'm going to access the curves, so Control M to bring up the curves menu, and I'm just going to pull it up like this to make her even lighter, like so. The reason why I use the curves to lighten things in the scene as opposed to something like the Hue Saturation is because the curves keep the contrast in certain areas. So it's only affecting the midtones, so things like her freckles and her lips and any drop shadows that are on her, they're going to be pretty well intact when I adjust the curve. So you can really see it right there that she still has her drop shadows and her lips intact. You can still see her freckles. I don't want it that much though, so I'm just going to go like that, just a little bit brighter, so we go from that to that. There we go. Skin tones are done. So that would be the skin tone tutorial. Thank you all for swinging by. As usual, if you guys have any questions or any comments, feel free to swing by my DeviantArt page. I am vest.deviantart.com, or you can email me at daviddelante@gmail.com. So thank you guys for swinging by, and I hope this has been helpful for you.